Going on, everyone? It's the Hub City Hoops Talk podcast. Jacob Harris, what's going on, dude? How are you, man?
I'm ready to get basketball started. I know Texas Tech football just got a big dub, but the real season's here, folks, and it's basketball season.
Man, it's here. I feel like we were having this conversation last time. We were like, man, we're finally back, and then it felt like it feels like it's been a year since the basketball season. We had the heartbreaking loss to NC State. Oh, I know RC and I did a live YouTube for that one.
Mm-hmm.
I got pretty drunk, was pretty upset, but man, that was a special team, that NC State team. So it's not, you can't really be too mad.
Oh
about
yeah,
it.
no, you can't be upset.
Can't be too mad about it, and it kind of leads us into the opening point I want to get into is like just looking back on year one really quickly, right? Under Grant McCasland, he kind of took over a young team. Like we had a lot of young pieces come back last year.
Yeah,
Bob Isaacs, Lamar Washington, Robert Jennings, like all these guys that were Mark Adams recruits, and kind of just he kind of just put a team out there and somehow found a way to win. I didn't think last year's team was like the most talented by any means. They definitely overperformed in terms of their roster talent and roster makeup and things like that. A lot more talent this year, Jacob. But quickly, what are your thoughts on last year's team and kind of what Grant McCasland was able to do?
so I kind of mostly agree with you on that. I mean, it's really he kind of first off he kind of got into the game a little bit late, just because he was directing North Texas to an NIT championship. Got on the plane, into March, which back then was already you're already 2 weeks behind at the portal, and I think he constructed what he could. Had some lucky breaks with like a Joe Toussaint entering the portal. That kind of thing didn't really happen this year. Not that way it was really expected to, but you kind of had a couple lucky breaks. You were able to get some veteran guys in here. Like you said, I thought they were going to be a bubble team, like a firm bubble team, and they overperformed. And had they not run into probably the one of the best Cinderella teams of all time, they could have easily made it to the Sweet 16. I don't know. It's just speculating, but solid overperformed. I really liked how he constructed his roster this offseason, which we'll talk about here in a second. But I closed the book on last season pretty quickly. And honestly, those of you that know me well just know that's kind of the nature of my work. Like I work with the Portal Report, and we're transfer portal focused, so I kind of put that in the rear view pretty quickly. But yeah, it was exciting for sure.
Yeah, and you have to, right? Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
McCasland and the staff do the same thing. They put it behind them. Obviously, there's a lot that I think they took away from last season, right? Like, one of the big weak points was not having any interior defense. It was
For sure.
it was an odd ordeal for Grant McCasland to not have a very good defensive team in general. I think you and me sat here, game after game, and we talked about how bad we were at rebounding, quite frankly. And also just how bad the defense was at times. I mean, it was like you had like one interior, threat defensively in Warren Washington. You had Joe Toussaint, who played pretty well on ball defense. But you had a lot of guys like, Pop Isaacs, I think is he deserves to be talked about a little bit on this podcast. And he will be missed in a lot of ways. We're not going to sit here and throw shade at Pop. I think he has been a pivotal piece to this team for the last 2 years. And honestly, he gave it his all. He played hurt last year at times, and he's dealing with a lot personally off the court with his family and things like that. So I think he's going to do great at Creighton this year. But I also don't think he's a great fit with Grant McCasland and what he's looking to do defensively, what he's looking to do from a physicality standpoint. But man, let's just jump into this year's roster, Jacob. We were pretty, if you subscribe to SVI, we were covering the transfer portal from start to finish. It was a pretty wild ride. It seems like this staff, Jacob, they always find a way to close like when it matters most. The year before, they had that trio of Warren Washington, Devin Cambridge, and Joe Toussaint, and that like completely changed the trajectory of the season. And then this year, what do? They go out and they beat Kentucky for Elijah Hawkins, and then they go out and beat Texas and a couple other people for JT Toppin, but really Texas. Whenever a lot of people thought that was a done deal, that he was going to Texas. It was, we didn't have enough money. We didn't have this. We didn't have that. And they go out and get JT Toppin, who's arguably, according to Evan Maya, a top 5 transfer of the entire cycle. So talk to me about the way that Grant McCasland built it, through your eyes from the transfer portal, and what you're most excited about.
So a lot of different, and I can kind of do this from an overhead national level. A lot of different teams look for a lot of different things. Some teams just look for pure raw talent, and that's kind of the Mark Adams way of doing things when he was here. If you remember, obviously the year he got, let go, he brought in a ton of raw talent, just talented guys, but, they could never coalesce as a team. We had the Maui incident. We had the tent incident. We had all sorts of incidents, and it just never gelled. Something that McCasland does that a lot of people don't do, he looks for some traits, but what he really wants to know is, do you contribute to winning? Have you won before? Like, all these guys have been in the NCAA tournament one way or another. All these transfers they brought in. What does your support system look like? That's a big one for him. Are you going to make drama? Are your parents going to make drama? Is your crazy Aunt Kathy going to make drama? Like that he looks so far and wide and looks at everything. He talks to junior high coaches, AAU coaches, high school. He talks to everybody and wants to make sure that you are the right fit for his program. And if you're not the right fit for his program, he doesn't care how many points you score, how many blocks per game you get. He doesn't want you here. And I think that he did a really good job of bringing in guys that all had good support systems, all contribute to winning, all know what winning looks like. And that's a hard thing to get because as we'll see Tuesday against Bethune-Cookman. But Bethune-Cookman has a couple of good players. We're not going to get into them too much because who cares? But they have talented guys, but, they have, 5 different guys that are on their 4th or more school.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not going to see that too much with Texas Tech. You're going to see guys that maybe have gone to a couple schools. You might be looking, Warren Washington is probably the exception, but I think last year you were really just looking for any kind of legit big, and you found him. So, anyways, I think he's done a really good job with building this to his formula, to his system, to what he wants to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's you're right. Like a lot of coaches, especially the Caliparis of the world, there's a lot of coaches out there who purely are going after the best available name, the biggest names. We've seen that. It's a slippery slope. Obviously, you mentioned Mark Adams, a year that a lot of people thought was the most talented Texas Tech team, maybe ever, was quite a disaster for Mark Adams the year that he let go. But just to revisit your points, you and me, we talk to Texas Tech sources quite a bit, especially whenever recruiting is going on and the portal cycle and stuff like that. And there's so many times where I check in on a guy and it's just an immediate no. Like we won't even reach out to this guy. He's he has this red flag. A lot of these names that are going into the portal, first of all, they know usually before they go into the portal because that's just how it works. Second of all, they already know what kind of character these guys have in a lot of cases. And if they don't, they're going to kind of put their investigative hat on and they're going to go reaching out to coaches, like you said, reaching out to agents, family members, past coaches. That's what they're going to do. And they're not going to they're going to uncover or turn over every stone trying to figure out kind of what this person's really like in the locker room. And I think that's special. And I think another thing that he talks about a lot is recruiting winners, like guys that have played in winning programs, played for programs who have high expectations, that have played in the NCAA tournaments. But honestly, there's a couple things I'm most excited about this roster. I think Tech crushed it in the transfer portal. They brought in very, very talented players. This was, one of the most talented portal hauls I think Texas Tech has ever brought in. Obviously, Mark Adams in year 1 brought in a crazy class. But they weren't perceived as a crazy class year, but they really blossomed. There's a couple of things I'm excited about. One is returning some freaking players for once, right? Returning a core of guys who are really good players, but also good leaders, good people on the courts. Not they're unselfish players. That's huge, right? You bring back Darian Williams, Chance McMillian, Kerwin Walton. You bring back Emili Yalaho. It's like these guys, especially the first three I mentioned, these are like three like really good starting caliber players in the Big 12. Obviously,
Yeah.
Darian's probably a notch above those other two, but those are three players who have a ton of experience in college basketball. They are smart. They understand the Grant McCasland system, and they play really well off each other. And they've built some really good rapport. I'm excited to see I'm excited to see all three of these guys, but Darian Williams specifically. I mean, he went on a freaking tear last year in conference play. This is pretty bizarre to me, but he actually averaged more points per game in conference play than he did for the entire season, which in the Big 12, that's like unheard of, right? Like that's like, how does that happen? Well, it happens because he was only a sophomore and he's getting better and better every single game. Grant McCasland's figuring out better ways to utilize him. But he actually ended up finishing the year in conference play at 13.1 points per game, 8.1 rebounds per game. I mean, we're talking about the guy almost averaged a double-double as a true sophomore. And he also averaged over 2.4 assists per game on 45.8% from three and 88% from the free throw line. I mean, that like this guy is a unicorn. He's only going to get better this year. The two guys that I'm going to focus on kind of this season that I think you're going to see carrying Texas Tech quite a bit in different ways. It's not going to be the Pop Isaac show where he's like one game, he makes 6 threes and he really helps us win the game. Right. It's going to be steady. It's going to be tough. It's going to be versatile, but him and JT Toppin, man, like talk about those two and what is that dynamic going to look like on the court?
So it's going to be interesting. We'll talk about kind of starting lineups later, but I think JT Toppin and Darian Williams are going to play the 3 and 4, and then the 4 and 5 together. I feel like you said, versatile. They're going to carry you, man. Toppin's a better 3-point shooter than people think. Darian Williams is obviously elite from out there. I do expect his rebounding numbers to go down a little bit. So I don't think anybody should really expect him to get more rebounds this year. And that's kind of because of the guys you brought in, not because he's going to be a worse rebounder or anything. But I think Darian Williams is really going to be your one. He's going to be your star. He's going to be the guy. If you need a freaking bucket, like we're running to play Darian Williams. And then, Toppin's going to carry you on both ends of the floor. I think he's going to be probably your best defender. You're going to put him on the best big, whoever that is. And then offensively, his offensive rebounding is so special. It's better than elite. It's special. It's something you don't see very often. And I've looked at I watched every single clip of his offensive rebounds last year. His touch around the rim and his presence around the rim, just knowing where balls are going to come off the rim at, it's fascinating, and it's very, very special to watch. And of course, he's only going to get better too. I think his numbers are going to be a lot better than they were at New Mexico, and that's saying something. I think they're really going to let him blossom and kind of be a star alongside Darian Williams. So I'm excited to see those two for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I know I've tweeted about this a lot because I really like JT Toppin. But as a freshman, guys, he led the Mountain West in rebounds, offensive rebounds, field goal percentage, blocks, and defensive rating as a true freshman. And that was a league, Jacob, where was a very good league last year, right? Like
it's probably a top. It's probably the 6th best league in the nation, and that's saying something because you have 30 of them, 31 of them. And the Mountain West is kind of close to being considered a high major if they have another couple years like they've had, with San Diego State making a run. Although they might pack up shop and head to the Pac-12. But I mean, it's gonna be fascinating to watch the Mountain West. But that's just kind of a side point of mine.
Yeah, it's I made that tweet a couple of days ago, but it really is unprecedented. Like you don't ever see freshmen do that. It'd be understandable if he led the conference in field goal percentage, right? Just one singular stat. He led the conference in several key statistics that you would look at and be like, wow, this is if you had a guy on your team that just had one or two of those, you would be ecstatic. We're talking about a guy who led a really good conference in some really important metrics.
Yes.
As a freshman, which is just it's special. I think because obviously Texas Tech doesn't get the kind of attention that some of the other programs in the Big 12 do yet. I think that Grant McCasland is working his way there, but this guy is being overlooked, Jacob. Like, in my opinion, there's two people who are being massively overlooked right now. It's Darian Williams and it's JT Toppin. They're going to be the two best players on this team by far. We will get into like the shooters on this team because I think Chance McMillan and Kerwin Walton are both going to average over 10 points per game this year. That's kind of a bold prediction I have. I mean, Chance already averaged that last year. I think he sees an increased role with Pop Isaacs being gone. He's going to be relied on more as a shooter, but also just a scorer in general. Kerwin Walton, too, I think him coming back is going to be big for this team. He's obviously one of the most efficient scorers and shooters in literally all of college basketball from a points per possession standpoint. We'll keep you up to date with all the synergy stats and all that as the season goes on. But I really do think that JT Toppin's being overlooked. I think Darian Williams is being overlooked a little bit. Obviously, the Big 12 is loaded. But keep your eye on those two guys. Like, it would not surprise me at all if one of those guys end up on a first or second team All Big 12 at the end of the year. It's probably more likely that it's Darian Williams, but I do think that JT Toppin is, like you said, Jacob, like he does everything good. Like there's nothing and he wins you games. He's gonna be like a fan favorite because he's gonna be the guy that's scrapping in the paint, grabbing offensive rebounds, getting putbacks. He makes a lot of high energy defensive plays that lead to like transition buckets and things like that. He can dunk it, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I think you and I were tracking the whole combine thing pretty closely because we knew Texas Tech really wanted him. We knew they had a good chance, but we also knew there was a good chance he may stay in the NBA draft. If it wasn't for Texas Tech, forking over $1 million+ he probably would have stayed or gone to maybe Texas school. But where I'm going with that is his 3-point shot looked good, Jacob, and I don't expect that to be like I don't expect him taking 3 to 4 3-point shots a game. But if he can knock down 1 or even 2 3-point shots per game, that could be huge for his development. But yeah, let's just move into the shooters, though, Jacob. I think that is really a strong point of this team because you brought back Kerwin Walton, you brought back Chance McMillan, you brought back Darian Williams. All three of those guys are what Evan Maya considers them all elite 3-point shooters based on their points per possession and their efficiency. But talk to me about the shooting of this team and how is that shooting going to kind of translate into wins for this team, right? Obviously, they have Elijah Hawkins. They have the interior presence with Fetty, and they have JT Toppin. But how are the shooters going to play a role with this team?
So you have something that you struggled with a bit last year, and you have guys that you're going to have lineups where you're going to have 5 guys that can shoot the rock. And if Fetty's in there, you're going to have 4 guys that can shoot the rock. Okay, you talk about the guys he brought in, like, we're not talking about, RC's favorite, Kevin Overton. He can shoot it. Elijah Hawkins can shoot it. I mean, all these, obviously we've talked about Toppin. He can shoot it. You're just going to have, it's just the spacing on this team is going to be crazy. And I think that's really going to be what, sets them apart, helps them take a step forward kind of going into this season. I can't hear you.
Muted myself. I was saying we haven't even talked about Devin Cambridge yet. It's like
we haven't.
Crazy. Like this team is so deep. I mean, so let's just dive in really quick too to starting lineup predictions. It doesn't really matter. I'm always like one of those people. It's like I don't really care what the starting lineup is because you're still going to have multiple guys. This is a deep rotation. You're going to have multiple guys play 20+ minutes per game. But I would be shocked if you don't see the starting lineup. I'm predicting health pending. There was some rumors that Elijah Hawkins could be banged up. I haven't seen anything about him missing time yet.
I heard like he might be like it's more of like it's gonna cause him to play like 20 to 25 minutes instead of 30 minutes a game.
Yeah, which I think is fine. Like I think that's he just needs to be an efficient passer.
Yes.
and kind of and just get guys, get guys the rock. Literally, that's it. Facilitate the offense. But yeah, I think I think talking about Devin Cambridge, it's like this is a guy who has started every game for Tech last season before he got hurt, was averaging 10 plus points per game. You bring him back, he reported. I mean, if the way that this staff operates with injuries, like if he wasn't 100% cleared, ready to go, fully back into the swing of things, he would not be playing and he would not be cleared. I mean, I think Rothstein just tweeted today that he's fully cleared and ready to go for Tuesday's game. Yeah. He's going to be a big piece for this team too. He's older now. He's old. He's old. He's physical. He looks like he's put some muscle on since last season. I'm really excited to see what he can do off the bench. I do think he comes off the bench next year, or sorry, this year. But here's what I see, Jacob. And let me know what your thoughts are. I see Elijah Hawkins always starting at point guard. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Chance McMillan starting at the 2. He's earned that role. I don't think there's any questioning that he'll be starting at the 2. Obviously, we got Darian Williams at the 3. I'd say the 2 through the 1 through the 4. It's pretty much a lock, right? The 5, I think we all kind of agree that Fetty is going to start at the 5. I don't know how much he's going to play necessarily. I think he's going to be used in situational type, game situations and things like that. But I would say for Fetty, 15 to 25 minutes per game is probably what you're looking at.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
They need him to just catch lobs and be an interior, defensive threat. That's literally it. We saw how many games last year, Jacob? It's honestly, it still blows my mind that Texas Tech was able to do what they were. But how many times did we see Texas Tech getting bullied in the interior last year? I think about when we played, Cincinnati in particular. Those teams, those long guys inside, man, they tore us apart. I'm really excited to see what we can do with length and with actual shot blocking inside this year. But that's what I would kind of foresee. So Hawkins at the 1, McMillan at the 2, D5 at the 3, Toppin at the 4, Fetty at the 5. So that's I'm pretty confident that'll be the starting lineup come Tuesday. And then you have your bench, right? And I think like the bench is what we should focus on because this is such a deep roster. Yes. So you already mentioned Kevin Overton. He's going to be a big part of this year's team. He's very versatile. I think he was a 91st percentile scorer efficiency-wise, points per possession last year. He can shoot it from the corners. Really a high IQ player. He's long. You obviously have Devin Cambridge coming back, who I also think is going to be – we'll see, right? I think it's still kind of up in the air what kind of role he's going to have next year. Yeah. And then you have Kerwin Walton coming off the bench. And then you have kind of this guy who really has taken the coaching staff by storm, and he's young. He led the Germany, was it the under-18 team to a gold medal?
Yeah, at Euro Cup.
So Christian Anderson Jr. I mean, everyone who follows Tech sports closely knows that Grant McCasland has raved about him. There's a lot of kind of rumors on the street that he's going to maybe have a bigger role than what we anticipated. Maybe that depends on Hawkins' health as well. But let's talk about the bench, Jacob. What do you see? Like, who are you looking at to come off the bench as like the 6th and 7th man? And what roles do you see those guys having?
I kind of see Kevin Overton and Kerwin Walton maybe splitting that role. If Christian Anderson comes on strong, he might be that guy because he can play the 2 guard as well. But I think especially early in the season, McCaslin's going to go with defense and experience. And Kevin Overton's a really good on the ball defender. He's super long and lengthy. Kerwin Walton brings you a ton of experience. Those 2 guys also allow you, especially Kerwin, to kind of push D5 and Toppin up a position. So when Fetty's not on the floor, you want to put Kerwin Walton in there. You can move D5 to the power forward. You can move Toppin to 5. And it really creates versatility. I mean, I think you're going to also see, like you said, Devin Cambridge also kind of gives you that ability. You can kind of put him 3 through 5. I think he'll probably stick him to the 4 and 5. I mean, I think last year early in the season, our favorite lineup was when Cambridge was at the 5. Like, you were just so athletic. Yeah. And so, Cambridge can hold his own down there. I mean, he's a big guy. And so I think I'm excited to see, but I think Overton and Walton are kind of going to be your 2 main guys off the bench we'll see how much they let Cambridge play to start the season. I anticipate between 10 to 15 minutes kind of starting out. It's going to ramp up, though. So I think by conference play, he'll be pretty close to 20.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's no reason to rush him back. It's like let him get comfortable, let him get kind of back into the swing of things from a pace standpoint. But I mean, dude, like there's been, we haven't talked about Emil Yalaho either, but I've heard nothing but good things about him, and he's had such an impressive offseason. I mean, really, outside of a couple of maybe some of the freshmen that Texas Tech signed this year, Leon Horner, Jazz Henderson, like you could literally make a case that every player on this roster is going to get some kind of run, right? Obviously, I think there's going to be tiers to it. I think like your first tier guys off the bench, like you mentioned, Kerwin Walton, Kevin Overton, Devin Cambridge. But man, the versatility that McCasland's going to have. I mean, those are three guys. Like those are two guys that were starting for last year's team who are coming off your bench.
Yeah,
last year's team, we finished third in the Big 12. So this is going to be a very talented roster. It's going to be deep. And I'm really interested to see what happens whenever Fetty comes out and kind of what they're going to do with Toppin. My theory is that, at times Toppin will slide to the 5. They'll go small. They could put a guy like Cambridge in at the 4. They could move D5 to the 4. So there's a lot they could do to go small and go athletic as well. I am fascinated to potentially see Kerwin Walton and Chance McMillan on the court together. I think that those two, obviously, maybe that's not going to be your best defensive rotation, but a lot of offensive firepower. And man, I'm really excited for this year's team. I'm very high on them. I think that they're being overlooked a little bit in the Big 12. Obviously, you have the top 5 who everyone, raves about. You have Kansas, you have Baylor, you have Houston, Arizona. So then a lot of people are high on Cincinnati right now. There's a lot of teams in the Big 12 that you could like legitimately make a case that are national, title contenders. But I think you could easily see Texas Tech getting into that top kind of tier of the Big 12 and if they can win their games at home and pull off some on the road, potentially competing for a title. But let's just talk at a high level really quick, Jacob. What is kind of your initial thoughts on what this team's ceiling is?
It's a good question. I think right now I would expect them to potentially be a second weekend tournament team, a Sweet 16, Elite 8 kind of group. They are super talented. I think McCasland got the guys he wanted. I think he got the guys that fit his system very, very well. And I think I have high expectations as well. I think this could be a really, really big year in terms of wins. I mean, you got two guys who were looked at as draft picks in the NBA draft. And you're not even talking about your two best shooters with those either. I mean, you could potentially put, some mega shooting lineup on the floor if you needed to. And it's going to be a fun year. I'm excited.
It's a versatile roster. And I think that's really important in the Big 12. There's so many different kinds of teams, right? Like you have the Houstons of the world who are extremely athletic, extremely physical, quick. You have to be able to match that when you play them. We unfortunately had the honor of playing Houston twice last year, and it didn't turn out well.
Yeah, did not.
It was just a really bad matchup for Texas Tech because of their athleticism, their speed, their physicality. This year's team is not going to struggle as much against these like highly physical and athletic teams, which is thankfully. Texas Tech finally has some guys that can play and that can handle it. JT Toppin is probably one of the most athletic players in the entire Big 12. You know what I mean? It's like
for sure.
Having a guy like that to anchor your team inside the paint is extremely important. Tech could have used that, really bad last year. And you had a lot of younger guards, smaller guards, I could say, that just struggled defensively at times last year for the team. But in terms of the ceiling for me, I think that the odds came out today for Vegas came out with the odds for Final Four odds. I think Texas Tech was 15th in the odds. So Texas Tech, or I guess technically they're tied with Tennessee and Purdue at plus 950. But I mean, guys, Vegas is buying this team. I'm buying this team. They have the coaching. Another thing that we haven't even really talked about is the new coaching addition that they added this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I'm really fascinated to see like what happens with the offense this year, right?
Me too.
You have Dave Smart that kind of obviously went on to Pacific. Now you bring in a guy who has literally been a head coach for most of his career
in the Mountain West last year too, by the way, with a decent team. I mean, Wyoming was good last year.
Yes,
it's not like he's coming from Mississippi Valley State or something.
No, and I mean Jeff Linder. We're talking about Jeff Linder, by the way,
yes,
guys.
Of course.
This is a guy who has led Wyoming to the NCAA tournament, I believe, and who has had success. Who's put guys in the NBA. He's also a big international recruiter, but he's big into scheming, and he's big into modern offense. And I'm really interested to see. I think I want to say McCasland had mentioned some stuff about pace and about spacing and shooting this year. So I'm really interested to see if the offense changes at all, if they're going to kind of keep running similar sets. But a ton of versatility on this year's roster. Some quick notes on the team from an analytics standpoint. Ken Palm had his initial top 25 come out. He's at Texas Tech's at 14. Evan Maya has Texas Tech at 16. And Bart Torvik has Texas Tech at 20. So, I mean, across the board, the analytics sites are buying in as well. So not only is Vegas buying it, but the analytics are buying it. And that's not even – I was taking a look at actually some of these analytics sites, Jacob. Other than Evan Maya, I mean, Bart Torvik is projecting JT Toppin to average 6 points per game. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. I'm not sure what the weighting is there, but this is a team who is extremely deep. Who, if Texas Tech is listed at 20 on Bart Torvik and they're projecting Toppin to only average 6 points per game, the ceiling could go up significantly higher from here. And then quickly, let's go over just kind of the Big 12 outlook as a whole, Jacob. Who are your kind of top teams that you're looking for in the Big 12 outside of Texas Tech right now?
I mean, Kansas, Houston, Arizona, Baylor, Iowa State, the usual suspects. I mean, obviously Arizona's new, but they've been elite for years and years and years. So I think Kansas. I think in my personal projection, I think Kansas is probably going to be the top. Bill Self heard all your criticism last year, by the way, about how the fact that he wasn't deep, and he and his donor buddies really paid a lot of depth this year. So I think whenever you have guys like AJ Storr coming off the bench, you're good. So they're really good, and they got a guy in Rylan Griffin that I know that Texas Tech was very, very interested in as well, elite 3-point shooter. So I think Kansas is going to be really good. I think they could be a Final Four team. Obviously, they have Hunter Dickinson in there at center. I think Toppin will match up and Fetty will match up pretty good with him. I mean, obviously Robert Jennings bullied him last year, so he's a little bit lower on my hierarchy of centers than the rest of the country. But I think Kansas will be good. Like Baylor's got a top 5 draft pick on their roster. You gotta look at the mid-level teams too. BYU's got some first-round draft picks. They might get Debansa. They're probably going to get AJ Debansa. And then Cincinnati's just got a bunch of experience, length, couple of good point guards, an all-time name guy in Jizzle James. You got, Kansas State. I'm not very high on Tang's group this year, but I wasn't last year either, and look what happened. So.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be a fascinating league because it's like you have your guys like you mentioned that top 5, and I totally left out Iowa State earlier when I was talking about the contenders. They'll absolutely be a contender.
Yes.
I don't want to leave them out of the mix. I would say like if we're looking at top to bottom, I I'm really interested to see what Baylor does this year. I think like bringing in Omie and Roach, I think will be fascinating. They have Edgecombe, who I think is going to be a top 10 pick, like you mentioned. So they're going to have talent. It's like I think for them lately, it's been like their defense has just struggled. They haven't been the kind of defense that we've come to expect, but their offense is just so freaking good. They're so efficient. They seem to be able to do just fine without having a really elite defensive team. But yeah, I think you have like a tier one. I think maybe I'm being a Texas Tech homer, but I really do think you could bucket Texas Tech into that top 6 group. I don't look at the rosters maybe outside of Kansas because they're just so loaded with talent, and we still have to see how it all pans out, right?
Of course.
Outside of Kansas, I think you look around and I'm like, I don't see a team that Texas Tech can't go, toe for toe with. I really
Oh yeah, I agree.
And I think they can still go toe to toe with Kansas. I just think that in terms of talent, they're maybe a little bit ahead of everyone else in the Big 12, just because of the guys they brought in this offseason. But also, that's kind of my opinion on this, right? I think that I know they can hang with Baylor. I know they can hang with Iowa State. I know they can hang with Houston. A lot of people are still projecting Houston to be that top 3, top 4 team in the country this year. I'm still a little bit skeptical. I'm not the biggest Milos Uzan fan. Like, I think that he wasn't – all of the efficiency metrics I looked at last year –
they're not good.
They're not great. He's definitely not a Jamal Shead. And that like he has a huge shoes to fill, right? And so we'll see what happens. They obviously brought back their core outside of their best player. But we'll see. I think that losing Shead completely changes the dynamic of that team, which that's just how it goes sometimes when you have great college basketball players. They can completely change the dynamic of a team. So we'll see. But that's where I'm going to leave it with Texas Tech. I think they can compete with any team in the conference. I think Kansas may have a talent gap from the rest of the pack. But, again, let's see what happens when they actually get onto the courts. The last year, I think people questioned their depth, but no one thought that Kansas was going to be that bad, right? Obviously, they had injuries. So we'll see what happens. Bringing in a bunch of talent doesn't always pan out, like we talked about in the beginning of the pod. But Arizona, I think, is another team that I'm curious to see how they pan out. Kansas State, BYU. Dude, even the bottom of this conference, we like it's going to be exciting to see, right? Like West Virginia could be sneaky good. I think that I really like their coach. I really like some of the guys they brought in. I really like Oklahoma State's new coach. UCF is bringing some guys in. I mean, it's going to be fascinating. I don't know what to expect, but top 6, 7 teams I expect to be in the top 25 on a kind of like on a weekly basis in the Big 12. I would say probably 9 teams to the NCAA tournament is kind of like what I would project at this point. So that's kind of where I'll leave it off with that. Jacob, anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, sir. Let's watch some hoops this week. I'm really excited.
Oh man, I know. I can't wait. So I think the game's on Tuesday, guys. We're recording this on a Sunday. Texas Tech will take on Bethune-Cookman, or is it
Bethune-Cookman?
Bethune-Cookman. Okay, Bethune-Cookman. They actually have a tough schedule. I'm looking at it right now. They got to go to Texas Tech and then to Nebraska. So that's a tough start to their schedule. But we'll see what happens. I think this team needs to gel together. We'll keep an eye on Elijah Hawkins. That is something we didn't really talk about, but just obviously let's just hope that he's not hurt. I think that is the one thing that could potentially change the trajectory of this team is if he gets hurt for an extended period of time. Listen, I hear all the Christian Anderson hype. I love it. I'm here for it. But if you're relying on a true freshman to run your point, you are in big trouble in the Big 12. I don't care who it is. We saw, lottery picks last year in the Big 12 struggle at times. So it's like young guys just struggle in this league. That's just how it goes. But Jacob, it's good to be back, man. I'm excited for some basketball. I know the SBI crew's going to be up in Lubbock this weekend, watching the Colorado game and also for the Hoops game. So guys, if you're subscribed over at Scarlet and Black Insider, get onto the board. We put some details out there about where RC and Jacob are going to be hanging out Saturday. But Jacob, as always, man, it's been great.
Yes, sir.